Hey guys, Art Deco might look pretty familiar because there's a lot of contemporary films and things like that. The Great Gatsby is a more recent one that use it as a theme. Art Deco is a fashion oriented and strongly decorative style. It originated in France after World War I. During this time, it was simply called Le Style Moderne. It was a movement in design that celebrated luxury and rich materials. It is best characterized as impeccably executed, costly, and elitist. The Art Deco style was clearly designed for the most elegant and affluent occupants. Extravagant Art Deco was brought to a halt by the Wall Street crash of 1929, when this kind of extravagance was neither tasteful nor affordable. With a heritage of artistry and requiring the consuming handicraft techniques, it was too costly to survive the Depression. But let's dive into the characteristics of this style in its height. Art Deco is heavily influenced by Cubist art forms. Cubism is an early 20th century avant-garde art movement that revolutionized European painting and sculpture and inspired related movements in music, literature, and architecture. Cubism has been considered the most influential art movement of the 20th century. The term is broadly used in association with a wide variety of art produced in Paris or near Paris during the 1910s and throughout the 1920s. The movement was pioneered by Pablo Picasso. In Cubist artwork, objects are analyzed, broken up, and reassembled in abstracted form, instead of depicting objects from a single viewpoint. The artist depicts the subject from a multitude of viewpoints to represent the subject in a greater context. And in a more mundane description, you can really see a lot of angles, and it does take on a bit of a cubist or cube-like look. So let's take a look at how that translates to architecture. In architecture, we see a lot of sharply angled forms in the Art Deco style. The angles and zigzags were thought to relate to electricity and radio, and it served as symbols of the modern world. The term jazz modern was sometimes used to suggest an affinity with the rhythms of jazz music of the 1920s. Large mirrors, polished metals, shiny black lacquer, glass, and mirrors serve to enhance these sharply angled and zigzagged forms. Furniture designer Eileen Gray is an icon of early French modernism. Her work inspired both modernism and Art Deco. Here we see her work in shiny black lacquer. She's made a screen that's composed of individual pivoting elements between 1922 and 1925. So let's look at that black lacquer in an architectural perspective. Here, the black lacquer is used to enhance another characteristic of the Art Deco style, stepped forms. So stepped or tiered forms. They have become a part of the Art Deco style because it relates so much to the skyscraper building type that's developing for the time, the way we step the skyscraper form up as it reaches higher and higher heights. In Paul Frankel's work, we see the stepped forms of tall buildings actually translated into his skyscraper furniture of the 1930s. Here again, Eileen Gray, we also see the tiered form inspiration in her Bibendum chair from 1925. Prominent light features were heavily used in Art Deco design to call attention to modern materials and electric lighting. Again, these materials serve to reinforce that zigzag concept and shape that were thought to relate to electricity and new inventions like the radio. This is the London Strand Palace Hotel and a better view of what it might have looked like in color. Really glittering and very glamorous. African tribal art was also a common decorative element. In this image, we see a black lacquer side table, also designed by Eileen Gray. So, a really prominent place to see this extravagant and expensive Art Deco style was in restaurants, hotels, and in the interiors of the great ocean liners of the 1920s and 30s. The image that you're looking at here is of the French ocean liner, the Normandy. It was a really big showcase of French Art Deco design work. And via the ocean liner, the Art Deco style spread internationally, both figuratively and literally from Europe to America. Here we see the Art Deco design for the British ocean liner, the Queen Mary. And this is more artwork that you see aboard the Queen Mary. Radio was one of the key innovations of the post-World War I era. It was a new means of communication and entertainment. Art Deco forms became really widely applied to the cabinets and consoles for radio receivers because they're being designed at this time. So the slick and curving forms of the enclosures carried Art Deco into almost every home, which is how Art Deco became very popularized among the masses with an object that they could afford. Another invention that had a major impact on the Art Deco design style is the airship. During World War I, the large dirigible came about, usually called Zeppelins after Count von Zeppelin, their leading industrial designer and producer. After the war, they were adapted as transport vehicles. So they were just about as large as ocean liners, and they could transport passengers in pretty comparative luxury. The form of the Zeppelin, with its very rounded bullet nose and long tapered tail that basically creates efficient flight. It's sort of aerodynamics, this smooth flow of airstream over the hull. It led to a major design motif referred to as streamlining that became fixed in the public eye as the visual symbol of future-oriented achievement. Streamlined forms became a major theme for the 1930s industrial design era. Here we see streamlining particularly well in the design of objects like Raymond Loewy's pencil sharpener or concept train or concept car design called the Hupmobile. But let's take a closer look at how it translates into architecture. In 1931, Belle Geddes designed a concept for the House of Tomorrow. It was featured in Ladies' Home Journal and became a major force in the streamlining movement. Featuring swooping highways and byways, it always kind of reminds me of like a Dr. Seuss storybook. But taking a look at his furnishings for the interiors, we can get back to a little bit more of the history of architecture. What you're seeing in the furniture, like Belle Geddes, is very typical of Art Deco design, with streamlined edges. They kind of roll over, and what it's called is a waterfall edge. So this, along with the radio, is another way that Art Deco style could really be affordable and a style that the masses could bring into their homes. So let's take a look at all this information and how it applies to architecture in the Art Deco style in America. New York has a really large number of examples, and Rockefeller Center is one of them. Many of the libraries and public spaces at Rockefeller Center are Art Deco in character. Do you recognize any of the characteristics that we've listed in this lecture up until now in this image? Radio City Music Hall is another great example of Art Deco design. It's largely the work of Donald Deskey. But here again, I'll start naming a few of the things that I see. I see the tiered forms. I see the light being used to reinforce those shapes. The architectural forms of New York's Chrysler Building, designed in 1930 by William Van Allen, with its stepped setbacks and stainless steel spike top, were ornamented with details intended to suggest headlights and radiator caps of Chryslers for their automotive products, which makes sense. It's the Chrysler building, so let's take parts from cars as inspiration for the building. So the building created the perfect setting for Van Allen's Art Deco interior lobbies, stairs, and elevators. Here's a few of the deco details of the interior. Another example for you is the GE building on 51st Street, also New York City. It exhibits many defining characteristics of the Art Deco style. Take note again of these stepped setbacks in the building shape. It's a really common feature in skyscraper design, particularly in New York, who use the Art Deco style quite a bit. In the building's exterior details, we see some really highly common Art Deco details of rounded, stepped shapes. You also see metal details above the clock. It actually kind of looks like it's conducting electricity. It's like this zigzaggy metal form. And here we see zigzagging lightning bolts coming out of this like cubist-style fist, as well as a cubist-style face. They're all symbols of the General Electric company still to this day. And then last, just take a look at the top of the GE Tower building. Mostly, this is the only time you're going to see it, not something you can really see in detail from the street. So taking this again to something that's a little bit more everyday. A more commonplace way that you're probably familiar with the Art Deco style is in the Great American Diner. So in addition to the popular form for being for trains and buses and automobiles and ships, streamlining became really well known in the American diner, sort of a short order restaurant in the form of a railroad dining car. So when lunch wagons moved off the streets, they grew in size and menu and stayed open 24 hours. During the 1930s, diners reached the height of roadside design. Whether it was a kitschy Zeppelin like the last image or an airplane, it was always meant to attract your attention for a stop on the road. Diner interiors typically exhibited all the deco characteristics: curving metal trim, mirrored and polished surfaces, long, streamlined Formica countertops, bright color accents, and neon lights. Which brings me to my next slide. Tubular neon lights became the pinnacle of Art Deco design when it became available in the 1930s. Signage and decorative lighting effects became all the rage in places like Miami, Florida, or a place that you might know a little closer to home, Wildwood, New Jersey. And now, to wrap this all up, we even have a whole museum dedicated to this old neon signage in Las Vegas.